Hello, everyone. Good night. I am so happy to be here with the one and only Rebecca Sugar. Rebecca, good night. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. And I know our audience is really excited for this talk. So I just wanted to ask you, like, what's it been? How you've been keeping up? In this COVID new reality.
Right. Right. Well, it's been very surreal. My last day at Cartoon Network was actually March 13th, the day that our lockdown started. So as soon as I was done at work, I was home on lockdown, and have been really since. But I had really hoped to spend this time learning a lot, and so it's been good. It's been good to have a chance to take a lot of classes that I can do over video chat, reading a lot of books. When I'm feeling powerless, I love learning and studying. That really makes me feel like I have a grip on something. And so that's really something I've been focusing on, especially guitar lessons, which I've been doing. I have 2 teachers now, both of whom are great. And so I'm doing that twice a week.
Great. I think that's something that a lot of people are glad to hear. Let's just start off with the questions from the audience. And we have a really good one here by Beren Alvarez. What did you learn while making comics that help you into your animation work?
While making comics, I think the really helpful thing about making comics, particularly independent comics, underground comics, is that I just got a lot of practice with storytelling and with coming up with characters, and just trying to communicate. And so really, by the time I was show running, I had a lot of personal comics under my belt, and there were a lot of ideas that I worked into Steven, that I worked into Steven Universe that were really, I had started coming up with them while I was drawing comics. So it's just you get to do a lot of experimenting. You're not getting notes from anyone, if you're doing it independently, so you can just try a lot of things out, even just on a really small scale, show them to your friends and see what they're reacting to. I had a habit in my comics of sort of assuming the person reading it would be able to follow a lot of complicated information. Like I had a character that had 4 different nicknames, and people would call this person by all these different names, and I thought, people just understand. Things like that. I trial and error. Like I learned, I would really have to introduce that concept before I could just throw a bunch of names out and expect you to understand that they belong to this character, things like that. But also ideas for, kind of fight sequence that I would like. Or I learned, especially from working on the comic Pug Davis when I was in my late teens and early 20s, that I really liked the thought of seeing a little bit behind the scenes of that I could create action characters, but I wanted to see their everyday interactions when they weren't in the middle of a fight, and when they weren't in the middle of an epic adventure. Like I wanted to see how they would sit together on a couch, or what they would talk about at 3 a.m. That was really interesting to me. And so when we were working on Steven, that was something that I wanted to keep alive. I wanted to have these really fantastical characters with these really sort of intimate and personal relationships with one another. So I really recommend, I think if I hadn't done those comics, I wouldn't have experimented with those ideas. And so I wouldn't have known when I started Steven what I liked and what I didn't like to the degree that I did because of doing all those experiments.
Great, thank you. So don't look down on comics, people.
Oh no, of course not.
Okay, so we have one by Alfredo Ponce. Could you give some advice on how to write strong character relationships?
Strong character relationships. Oh, sure. I think strong character relationships, I've found it's really helpful when I'm drawing from personal experience. So I think that when I say like, oh, you could base someone off of your friend or a family member or your relationship with that person, it doesn't necessarily have to be hyper literal. I mean, in the case of Steven, the main character was literally based off my younger brother Steven, but also like the dynamic between Pearl and Amethyst and Garnet, these are all based off of relationships I had in my life, and also the relationships of different people on the crew really got pulled into those characters. So drawing from personal experience, you can really pull that into any character in any situation, even if it's not a one-to-one reference to that person. Anything you sort of have noticed about a personality in your life that's interesting, or the way that bounces off another friend of yours or another person you know or yourself. When you work those little specific details in, it really brings characters to life in a unique way. Even if you have a character that's maybe based on something really tropey or an archetype you really like, even just sprinkling a little bit of a specific thing about them that you've observed in your life, even just adding that in there will create a really unique character. So I would say maybe the first step to creating strong characters and strong character relationships is just to become very observant of the people in your life and of the way that they're interacting and of the way that you are interacting with others, and trying to find the special moments and specific details that feel real, and incorporating those things.
Great. No, thank you. That's some really great advice. And okay, so let's. This one is by Melanie Anaid Lopez. What is your process when writing a song? And I would also like to include and then working that into an episode.
Sure. Well, for the show, writing a song, it would really have to start with the story of the episode and the point that we were trying to make, or what we wanted the song to be able to do. So when I'm looking at a song, I want it to be there for a reason. I want it to mean something, especially something that's so emotionally heightened, like singing. You want the character to be in a place where they really have no choice but to express themselves in this heightened way, right? So we would look for those moments where it's like, oh, this should be a song because this is a real turning point for this character. And then before the song existed, so it's a storyboard-driven show, so we start with outlines. And then the storyboarders will take the outline, which will have, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, what the characters are doing, where they're at emotionally, where they're arcing to within the episode, within the act. We would find the spot where the song would need to go. The character is feeling this way. They begin the song. By the end of the song, they're feeling a different way. Then once that existed, I would go kind of squirrel away in my home. And I didn't really have time to write the songs at work, so I would do them really after hours or in the shower or over the weekend, knowing that it needed to do what it needed to do, knowing that the character had to start from this place and get to this place. And I think I would also try and figure out, because it's a bit hard to write a song that's not coming from a personal place. I would have to sit down and think, why am I interested in this story? Why are we doing this episode to begin with? And try and figure out where it was coming from really within myself, so I could build the song around that, so it could have personal meaning to me. And then there would usually be a lot of trial and error. Again, I would tend to write sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 versions of a song and scrap the early ones before we would ultimately end up with something. There were several versions of Here Comes a Thought before the final. Let's see. A lot of the songs from Mr. Greg, It's Over, I worked on for months, maybe not months, maybe a month, but just so many versions of it that didn't feel right, didn't feel like it was quite there, and then I would kind of start from scratch. And then I would try to get that done before we handed it out to the storyboarders, so that when they got the episode, they would have an outline with the beats of the story, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and then a fairly finished demo of the song in order to board to it. And sometimes it would be missing an intro or work together to kind of take it to tight, really figure out how to get it all the way there. And then sometimes I would have the outline with the place for the song, and I would give it to, say, Jeff Liu, one of our storyboarders, he would write a song as he was storyboarding it, because he's also musical. And I would work with Ben Levin, one of our writers, who would do bass lines, because he plays the bass. it was very collaborative. Also, kind of once I had that something started, I could bring it in and I could work on it with everyone. So having room for a little flexibility was important too, because I think early on you don't want to lock things down too much in case somebody has a better idea or a stronger angle. And I would take a lot of notes on the lyrics I'd already written as I was handing it out. You know, maybe we could have something else here. I remember for It's Over, Joe Johnston actually extended at the very end when it's like, and she chose you and she loved you and she's gone. The really long gone wasn't long when I had written it, and he actually took the demo and he stopped it so that he could stretch out that moment and then played it again. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. So we extended it. Things like that, these little moments were really added by the team. So I would say it really starts with the premise, starts with the characters. Then you can fit the song itself into what it needs to do, and then you want to leave it open enough for some collaboration with the team. Also, ultimately, the arrangements, which were done by our composers Ivy and Sarashu, I mean, they take all of the Steven songs to a totally other level. So the stuff I would be doing would be very bare bones, ukulele demos, omnichord sometimes, and then I would ultimately tell them, and so we would board with the demos, and then when we had finished animation back, I would bring that to our composers, and I would say, this is supposed to be a big Broadway number, or this is supposed to be a full classic rock kind of sequence, and then they would just bring it to life with all the right instrumentation and all this nuanced thought about different characters' instruments and how they could become the backbone of the piece if the piece was supposed to represent that character. So one thing I would talk about with them is we all love to overthink. I mean, we think everything through, and almost everything has a meaning to it, down to the sound of a bell or the rhythm of something that So our meetings would often be about that. It would be musical, but it would also be about what does every element mean in terms of the arrangement, in terms of where it's placed in the episode. Everything kind of has to have a reason.
Great. It's and did this process stretch out the time that you would have to do an episode compared to one that didn't?
I never got more time. No. The episodes with songs didn't have a different schedule, so it was really just a matter of finding the extra time at home, or just making it work. It really wasn't until the movie, because that was going to require so many songs, that I actually said, hey, I need to do nothing but write songs. I spent six weeks. I managed to stop post-production and only be writing music, which was still a little tight for me, because it usually takes me over a week to write a song. I'm not really trained in songwriting. I sort of reinvent the wheel every time I do it. So for that amount of time, I was just scrambling to write songs as fast as I could, because I only had so much of a window, working with a lot of different collaborators to help me move faster. But other than that, it was always the same schedule. So if anyone out there is planning on having a show with a musical component, I would strongly recommend looking at the schedule at the very beginning and building in extra time for anything with music, because that really is its own. Well, especially if you're show running and doing the music, you want to give yourself a little more time for that. Take it from me; it would be really helpful to have that room.
Yeah, that's some great advice. And on this topic, we have one here. Okay, so everyone's asking, and I think we gotta get this out of the way. Are you ready to talk about what's coming next, what you've been working on? Everyone's dying to know that.
That's really nice. I can't really talk about it yet. I have a couple things that I'm working on, but I can't really talk about it because they're still in development, and but mainly during this time, I'm really trying to figure things out and learn a little bit more, especially about music, and just see that I have a lot of different ideas. So I'm really trying to choose which one I want to devote the next chunk of years to, because I was with Steven Universe for working on it for 7 or 8 years, and so I want to make sure that my next project is something that I really care about and that can grow with me. Because I always want to choose a project that will give me room to sort of change and grow as a person and work on something that I want to work on as an artist. That's really how I choose a project. So I'm looking at everything I want to do and trying to see what's going to give me that room.
Right. Okay, we have here one by Andrea Oviedo. How do you start to build your own story and the world around it?
Well, for me, so I mean, everyone I think has a different process. But for me, I really like to start with characters, and I like world building, but I like world building in a way where all the elements of the world end up telling you about the characters. I think with Steven Universe, we wanted to work in these science fiction elements, these fantasy elements. But what excited me is that I wanted to make sure that all of those ideas, those fantasy ideas, also let you know about the characters and who they are and their personalities, and gave you insights into them as well as insights into the world, and that every aspect of the world had a meaning to the characters. You know, what Homeworld means to Pearl is different than what Homeworld means to Garnet, is different than what Homeworld means to Amethyst as a gem that was created on Earth, or what Homeworld means to Jasper as someone who's also created on Earth but then became a really reputable soldier to the gems in Homeworld. So that's what I really like. I like to start with characters and then create worlds and situations that inform you about the characters and enhance your understanding of those characters. So I sort of build from the center out. But then I know people who love the world building part, and that's sort of where they start, and then they end up inventing characters that can inhabit the world that they've built. I don't think that either way is better or worse. I think it just depends on what you love to do. Both, all possibilities are great. All forms of creation are great. So, but I really love exploring characters.
Okay, thank you. And we have here one by Diana Sela. Hi, I love everything you've created, and I was wondering if you could give us some advice on how does it work when you start directing in a new team, working with a new director, and do you have some advice on the business part of the animation? As an artist, I feel that I fall short in that department.
Oh, on the business side, let's see. Well, so working with a new director, I mean, I think it's important to know when you are entering a sort of a creative relationship with anyone, you know, who they are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, what you love about what they do, and what you would like them to bring to the project. No matter what, I think when you're in a management position, as a creative person, as a creative manager, the key is really communication, because you're going to end up doing so much that you won't have a lot of time with each part of the process. You need to be able to go and tell people what you're looking for as fast as possible and as clearly as possible. And it's also, I think, important for that director or any member of the team to really understand two things. One being what you want, and two being what you're flexible on. So if there's something that, if you have a character and you know that character, you know, needs to be green and needs to be pointy, because these are both parts of that character's personality, but maybe you don't really care what kind of shoes they're wearing. You could be like, hey, you know, go crazy on the shoes, but this person just has to have points all over them. That's something you could say to a designer, and then they would know what your priorities are. So that kind of communication for a director, a designer, a color stylist, it's really important to be able to just communicate the boundaries of what you're looking for versus what's flexible. As for the business side, that's never really been my strength. I think that it's very, for anyone else who that isn't their strength, you know, it's important to have representation, have a lawyer, have a manager or an agent who can fight those battles for you. I'm not particularly great at doing that. I didn't have one like that, and I definitely feel a sense of security now that I have somebody to be able to jump on the phone for me and make a case for what I want and support me in that way is really helpful. And someone who just knows the ins and outs of sort of Hollywood legalese, because it's Greek to me. I have no idea how to understand that stuff. All I really want to do is draw. So having someone in your corner is really important. And I think finding a person and finding a team that can sort of allow you to just be creative without worrying that you're getting taken advantage of. That peace of mind is really important. So anything you can do to know that you're being taken care of in that way, I definitely do. So yeah, best of luck. That part is really stressful, but the working with the team part is really wonderful. I think as long as everything you're interested in doing is really clear and you're excited about collaborating, then that part is just the most wonderful part.
Yeah. Okay, we have here one by Alma Angelica. Do you see more women in the industry creating and directing projects? How was it for you? Did you have any struggles making people listen to your ideas?
Sure. Yeah. It's difficult. I mean, I think the thing about this industry, it's interesting. Sort of the conversation about inclusion and really being excited about different voices in the industry. I mean, that's all really important. But I think the thing to remember is that the marginalized artists, women, people of color, for large part, non-binary individuals, gender expansive people, have really been kept out of these jobs. So even though it's exciting to celebrate all of these firsts, that there are finally women and non-binary show creators doing this amazing work more and more often, it's still so not equal. There's still so far before it will be equal, and then even once it could be equal, there's still this history of us being marginalized as artists. So I think it's really important to recognize that, and then also to recognize how much incredible work has been made by women in the past and kind of sidelined as an accomplishment in favor of, I mean, the oldest animated film that exists, The Adventures of Prince Ahmed, was made by a woman in Germany. And yet when people talk about animated films, her name is Lottie Reiniger, they have often omitted her. Right. And so often when I'm asked about women in the industry, I like to point out that in a lot of ways there was a woman that was at the forefront of this entire industry. But then by the time you get to the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it was very difficult to for anyone to have a job really outside of ink and paint, where people were being where women were being kept in less story-related roles, and then even throughout all of this, there have been all these really impactful, really important artists who aren't men and female artists. I'm trying to think of where I'm going with this. I think it's very important to celebrate the progress, but it's also really important to remember that the situation that really does exist, which is that it's not necessarily a good thing happening, it's a bad thing that is stopping a bad thing from happening, if that makes sense. Ending exclusion. So I think with that in mind, I'm really excited to see more and more work in the future from different voices and from artists who have been historically marginalized, because frankly, there has always been incredible work happening since the dawn of time from artists like that, and we just have to make sure that we're protecting it and supporting it and allowing it to continue and ending the tradition of exclusion.
Right. Giving it also the proper window and exposure. Okay, so we have one here by Fernando Rendon. Regarding character acts and plot, how much did you have planned from the get-go, and how much did you write board after the show became a huge hit and it kept getting picked up for new seasons?
Right. Well, I had a lot of ideas really from the pilot stage about what I wanted to do, and I tried to hide some of little hints in the pilot itself to hints about Garnet being 2 gems and being a fusion, and Ruby and Sapphire and their powers, things like that. I had a big list at the pilot stage of all these different fusions and drawings, early drawings of Smokey and Sardonyx, and in a sketchbook from before the show. So a lot of that was set up in advance, and I knew which weapons I wanted them to have and things like that. But there were big overarching plot points that really came together when we were sitting down as a team around season 1, especially. There are some ideas in future that go all the way back to some of our group writer meetings, because I had these early drawings of Steven sort of in a really big pink mode, which we ultimately ended up using for Steven Universe Future 170 episodes later. But we were all really fiercely debating this concept, like, do we want to have this? Because I had been calling him Perfect Steven, and we were all sort of getting really riled up, like, is that perfect Steven? Isn't it wrong to say that there's a more perfect version of Steven than Steven himself? And then we started to sort of think about this idea of, a Steven that's sort of swollen with magic and empowered in this way as actually being something that is a little unhealthy and a little scary. Or the idea that you could sort of separate his power and his pink self from his human self, and the idea that not only would that not be a better version of him, that it would be a terrifying version of him. And these debates, which happened around season 1 as a group, really ended up defining the whole end of the show, defining what we ultimately did for Change Your Mind. And I was really excited about that because I saw how heated all of our debates got in the room, and I thought, well, there's really something here. This is really pushing a lot of buttons for us about Steven and who he is as a character. So I think that this is really at the center of something really important to the show and this character and what we're trying to say. So yes, but that said, I did have so I had these sort of flexible long arcs and goals, and then as we got pickups for more episodes, I would be navigating how to pace that out. And then at a certain point, I was told that the show would have to wrap up, essentially, and I started campaigning for more episodes that would ultimately become Change Your Mind. And so then at that point, a lot of the plans, we really had to figure out how to get them all into this sort of big final arc, and so that we were kind of riding the pickup schedule. Then I really wanted to make the movie, and then we got Future. So there were some elements, like the Big Pink Steven that we had been wanting to do for a really long time, where we now found a new home for it in Future. So a lot of this process has been having a lot of dreams and visuals and goals that we wanted and plans, and then kind of riding the waves of how television animation works and what our pickups were, and as the years went by, all the strangeness of the scheduling and stuff, to try and really get all of our ideas out there as best we could. And I'm really fond of what the show ultimately became, because I really think that was part of it. It was all such a roller coaster because of the way that we were, producing it for television, and finishing every week. We would finish an episode and still be doing pre-production on other episodes, and just trying to navigate the scheduling and the shifting landscape. I mean, television, when I started working on this in 2012, the nature of television was so different, and now it's 2020, and streaming exists, right. And the idea of binge watching a show, that was only just coming into existence when we were starting the show, except that's how we, really like to watch shows. Like we all loved marathoning anime. So that felt intuitive. And, I remember early on, we would dream of a day when someone could just watch the whole thing from start to finish. However they would be able to do that, if they had a DVD box set, or if they had somehow had it all collected online somewhere, without ever thinking that might happen in an official way, which it now has. So I'm glad that this is. I went on a real tangent here, but I'm just glad that there's so many avenues now to watch cartoons and to allow for experimentations in the format. The fact that we were writing a sequential show was a big issue, honestly, for most of our run. It made it really hard to rerun the show, and when we were making something with a demographic of 6 to 11-year-old kids, they wanted to just be able to put a random episode on and have people watch it. And because we had this continuity, we were a real problem. That was really trouble, and we all really cared about it. We wanted to do it, but it was not what we were supposed to be doing. So that was also part of navigating telling these long arcs, was figuring out how to do it in this format that was really trying to fight back from being that. But I think that we were able to work with the situation.
And we have here one from Sant Arellano. Was it difficult to pitch a show with such a large female cast?
Let's see. I mean, it wasn't difficult. It was, in ways, it was difficult to pitch. I think there was a lot of skepticism about whether or not young boys would be willing to watch the show. But having come from working on Adventure Time, which had a really interesting cast of characters in it that did not at all deter boys from watching the show, to have full episodes about Bubblegum and Marceline, because they're really interesting characters. Bubblegum is really scary and Marceline is really fascinating, and they're both really relatable. Things like that, they resonated with our whole audience, not just a fraction. And so I knew that something like that could definitely work. So yeah, really once it started airing and once people started getting into the characters, I think it became pretty impossible to ignore that it worked. And one thing that I would insist that again people were often skeptical of was that that the young boys that were watching would be able to relate to the gems.
Right.
And that was like a real no compute for a lot of people. But I was sure that it would be fine, because as a kid I had no problem relating to male characters. And I don't really identify as a woman, but I was able to relate to female characters. So I knew that people could extend their minds into these characters if they were complex and interesting and had specific personalities, and then that ended up being true. So I really think at the end of the day, what matters is the richness of the storytelling and the characters that are involved, and really feeling like when you're watching these characters, these are people that you know and are connecting to. So I think when you have that, when that's a big priority, then whoever that cast is, it's really about them being compelling and really fitting those parts. And I was so lucky to find my cast for Steven Universe, such amazing cast to work with, and everyone was so fun, and they all had a real rapport with each other. They really became friends. They really felt like a family when we were all in the booth together. They would go even outside of Steven Universe. The cast members would go and see Zach perform when he was doing stage projects, and they would come into work and they would talk about seeing his performance, or they would show up for each other's concerts. I mean, they all got to know each other. So I think that's really something too, is finding a cast that not only fits well with the characters, but also fits well with each other, and then really learning from their dynamic and also incorporating that into your work. I think what my goal with Steven Universe was to make sure that every aspect of it was very collaborative, including the casting and the cast members and how they felt about the stories that they were performing. I liked to fold that into the story as well. So I think that's the key. Just really caring about your casting, caring about your characters. I think that will be visible and audible to everybody who's watching.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that it really touched different, like all generations. So great work on that. We have one here by Tere Remis. Your show manages character arcs so beautifully. How do you write complex, lovable characters?
Complex level.
Lovable characters, yeah.
Lovable characters. Oh, well, again, I mean, as I mentioned before, I think really, really pulling from the people that you love. I mean, if you want to make a lovable character, then you need to look at the people in your life that you love and think about, why, what is connecting me with this person? Like, what is it about them that I just can't get enough of? And then you can work that into your characters. I think, for me, one of the things that I really wanted to explore, especially with the Steven Universe characters, is that I wanted them to all have really interesting flaws and really interesting problems that they were struggling with, especially sort of issues that they were struggling with that I hadn't felt like I'd seen in a cartoon or on a cartoon character's face. You know what I mean? And I wanted to see these moments, the moments where I had felt for people in my life, or the ways that I had felt, when I had been feeling low. Like I wanted to be able to create cartoon characters that could embody that, and and kind of prove that when you're in that place that you deserve love. Asking for that love from the audience, and also from us, like asking that compassion from us as we're drawing these characters making mistakes. And I mean, in a way, kind of the act of drawing that and working through that and figuring that out, kind of lets us know as artists that we're also allowed to be flawed, and we should also get a chance to work through it and be loved. And so for me, that's really the angle I approached it from. But I really think for everybody, whatever it is you love in the people you love, whatever it is that you can find, to love in yourself, if you put that down on the page, I think it will really reach people. It will really, really resonate with a lot of people, because you're really sharing what you love.
Yes, most definitely. We have one here by Alma Angelica Canchola. What would be the advice you could be given to all women and the LGBT plus community, people in the industry who have their own stories and want to be listened?
Right. I mean, I would just say create as much as you can, and I think the industry, it can be very difficult to navigate, and in a lot of ways, I really never expected to get to express myself in this way through a format so that was this mainstream. So I would say that if you are in a position to make something on a scale like a television show, or to be in the industry, I would say, don't hold back. Let it be really personal, and let it be really specific to you. There's also a lot of pressure. This is something that I've noticed. There's a lot of pressure, especially for marginalized creators, because there's so little that exists, to create some sort of overarching character that reflects the entirety of the LGBTQ experience and will somehow fit for everyone. And the truth is that it's impossible. That's a bar that nobody could ever reach, because there are so many incredible different LGBTQ experiences in the world. And the one, I think, if you're writing from your personal experience, I don't think there's anything more powerful than that, because the truth of that and the specificity of that is what will connect us with you, and it's that human connection that we've been denied for so many years and centuries. We deserve to be able to connect with each other on a human level. So I would say, don't hold back your personal story. If you're not in a position to do work on a mass media scale, don't wait either. Make comics, make illustrations, make short films, anything you can, because please, we really need more and more work that we can connect with, so we can find each other, so we can understand the broad and beautiful spectrum of our different experiences. And I think if you end up in a situation where someone is saying that the way that you're expressing your specific experience for everything, just know that that's not possible, and that there's really nothing more powerful than what you have to say about yourself and your life.
Great, that was great. Thank you. Okay, we have here one by Atsin Aranda. How do you set your personal experiences, stories, and feelings into a script or a story that everyone can feel related in some ways and impact the viewer sensitivity without making it too personal?
I might be the wrong person to ask this, because I think in many cases I've made it way too personal. I think well this is the thing. I've really thought about this a lot. One thing that I think really helps is just developing a really good sense of your own boundaries, because there's definitely a line, between what you're willing to share and what you're comfortable talking about and what you're not, And sometimes it can be tough when you're storytelling and you really want to dig deep. You might feel pressured to share things that you're not ready to share, or to maybe explain what you're writing about in a way that's going to reveal, the very deep place where it's coming from. And at the end of the day, you're really in control of this. This is your story. This is your personal experience, and you are allowed to draw that line wherever you want to draw it. I think early on, sometimes with Stephen, and in general, I would feel a lot of pressure to sort of explain where I was coming from, even if it went to a place that I wasn't really ready to talk about. And then there were a lot of times where I would be explaining an idea and I hadn't really figured out where it was coming from, and kind of the act of talking it over with the team, I would be like, sometimes I would realize this is not something that you grew up feeling. I guess this is something that I really had going on that you didn't, and it was actually really illuminating. But that can be really tough. And so just remember, you get to draw that line. You don't have to share anything you don't want to share. It's at the end of the day, it's your art, and I think of art as communication. And just like you don't have to say anything you're uncomfortable saying to someone, you don't have to draw anything you're uncomfortable drawing about either. But I think if you want to connect with someone and you want to connect with them on a personal level, then you just think about what it is you feel personally and how you want to put that out there, how you want it to be received. I think it's really important. I always think about art like a conversation. I have this theory that it's a little bit like a blind date, where you don't necessarily know who your audience is, but you want to communicate with them. And I think, you can either say the thing that you think they really want to hear, which is that's not a great conversation, right? You're going to feel like you're just saying the things you want to hear, or you can just talk and not care if they are interested or not. That's also not a great back and forth, right? So I feel like the sweet spot is when you're communicating something you really care about and you really hope that they care about it too. You're trying to be clear and you're trying to be emphatic, and you're trying to get them interested in the thing that you love. So that's how I think about approaching it. And again, if it's personal, that's also the thing. If you go to that first interaction with someone and you're just like, here's everything, that can be a little overwhelming, right? Which is, that's okay if that's the way you want to do it, but it might be a lot. So really figuring out how you want to share yourself with someone. And in the case of, if you end up doing a show that has 50, 100, 200 episodes, then that's a lot of time you could spend getting to know one another and slowly letting people into your world.
Right. That's gold, everyone. So okay, let's do this one from. Okay, I just lost it. Oh, here we go. Galilea Perez. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for being here. I'm a big fan of your work, and you're one of the reasons I decided to be an animator. So the question is, how can you explain such difficult topics in a kids in a TV show meant for kids? P.S. They love you, Rebecca.
That's so nice. Well, I think one of the reasons I really like making a show for kids is that, there's many reasons, but kids are really smart, and really intuitive. And I think when it comes to interacting, you know, with one another, with other kids, with adults, you know, kids really understand the dynamics of a relationship. You know, they know when they're being patronized. They know when someone cares about them and is trying to connect with them. You know, these ideas, these complicated ideas about relationships, you know, we as human beings, we're experiencing that. We're connected with that from a very young age. We understand the dynamics of a relationship, and you know, who we're feeling out. We're learning for the first time, like, what does it mean to trust someone? What does it mean to have your trust violated? Those are epiphanies you're having at a very young age, often. And I think the other thing that I love about making something for children, for young people, is that I think that a lot of prejudices are learned, and it can be, I think a lot of adults think that there are difficult ideas in the show, complicated ideas in the show, but I think that's because if you're older, I think many adults are expending a lot of effort trying to unlearn, you know, really bigoted ideas and prejudices that have been foisted on them throughout their childhood. So when you're still in your childhood, you don't harbor a lot of that. You don't harbor a lot of that wrong information. You know, you don't harbor a lot of these, you know, ideas that are frankly very unnatural. You know, the idea that, you know, a certain kind of love between two people, that one version of it is right and one version of it is wrong, or one version of it is supposed to be adult and the other is supposed to make sense to kids. You know, that's learned. Like, that's a very unnatural idea that is learned. So I think, you know, speaking to a young audience, something like the relationship between Ruby and Sapphire, I mean, you can just see it on screen and you understand that these characters love each other. But then I have members, you know, adults watching the show that are like, this is so unusual, this is so extreme. But when you're young, it's not. It just makes sense. And so I think that's another reason that I have loved making something for kids, especially, you know, when these episodes were airing in, you know, 2015, 2016. You know, you have 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds explaining to their parents what this is because it's so intuitive. You know, adults who just have never seen something like this on TV, they think, oh, this shouldn't be there. But that's not an idea that's crossing the mind of the 6-year-old, of the 7-year-old.
No, that's fantastic how the mind works at that age. And in that line, Maria Fernandez Yanez asks, would you be interested in making any shows for a more mature audience in the future?
Yeah, I'm interested in that. I mean, the thing I love about animation is that it's, you know, it's a medium, it's not a genre. Right. And I don't really feel like I have to stay in any one genre or in any one age group. I'd really like to explore all these different aspects of animation. So again, I haven't really decided what it is I want to do, but that's definitely not off the table. I think you know, another thing that excites me is that I was excited going into making a cartoon for younger kids because there's a real visual language for what an action show looks like or what a comedy show looks like, that I wanted to find something that played with those ideas but also challenged them, you know, something that would be kind of too lush and pretty to look like a conventional action show, you know, too dynamic to look like a regular comedy show. And I think that the language for adult animation is really interesting to me. There's so many different versions of it. I think a lot of adult animation, it almost feels as if, you know, it's almost deliberately naive looking, or you know, not really lush or deliberately unsophisticated, almost like it's like saying to the audience, like, hey, you and I know we're like watching a stupid cartoon, right? Like that's like the tone of, yeah. And I'm not saying all adult animation is like that, but it's a style that I find really, really interesting, because I think that almost like self-deprecation of being the audience member for a cartoon, even though you're an adult, and that it kind of can't have a certain level of sophistication or mystery to it, or it's violating this contract, right? That it's like, hey, you know that I know that we're like watching a dumb cartoon, you know, right, you know what I mean? That language is really fascinating to me. beautiful, complicated language of anime, or the sophisticated, some of the sophisticated visual language of independent shorts from Canada, or I mean, there's just so many brilliant, completely different animation styles that have been designed for these different audiences. I'd love to play with all of that. I wish I had a million years to try everything. So yes, my point is I'm totally interested.
Yeah, I think that's going to make a lot of people real happy. And I think it's also interesting that even though a lot of people think about comedy when they think of adult animation, it's been evolving into different genres, and we're starting to see people experimenting with drama and just doing all sorts of crazy things with adult animation. So yeah, I think it's a great time for that.
Yeah, I should forgive me. I do think I'm being too general. There's so much interesting stuff going on, so that's definitely not a catch-all for the look of adult animation. I really love I really love so much of what's been done in that world, and the various looks that have been developed for it.
Yeah. Okay, let's do. Okay, this one is from Argentina. Noelia Belen, what advice would you give to someone who wants to present a pitch Bible?
Wants to present a pitch Bible. Let's see. I mean, I think the number one thing when you're doing a pitch and when you're doing a pitch Bible is really clarity. Just really having a really full understanding of your idea and just getting it across as clearly as possible. Really breaking down the characters and keeping things very short, dense with information, but very short. You want to be able to really describe a character in just a few sentences and really feel like you understand not only who they are, but how they're going to bounce off of the other characters. And you want to be able to describe the world very quickly, and not only the world, but why these characters make sense in that world and where the interest comes from. I think at the end of the day, when you're pitching, that's really the thing you need to be able to articulate just why it's going to be interesting, just where the friction is going to happen, and where the conflict is going to come from, and also why it's going to be relatable, why it's going to engage people. That's something I've seen, especially with pitch Bibles, is sort of what versus why. I think there are many cases where someone's able to describe what the show is, but I think the most impactful descriptions are the ones that describe why the show is the way that it is. Why you want to make it, why it's personal to you, why it's going to generate so many ideas to have these people in this place, dealing with this problem. Right. Just if you can latch onto those whys, then that's really powerful.
Great. So get on improving those Bibles. Okay, so this is going to be the second to last. We're going to do this one from Bernabe Guerrero. What non-artistic characteristics do you think you need to have to be a good showrunner?
Oh, what non-artistic?
Non-artistics, yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, as I said before, it's really about communication. Communication skills are everything. I mean, you could have the most incredible drawings and the most unbelievable, brilliant ideas, but if you can't communicate that to your team, it's going to be very difficult for them to execute that. So I think the other thing is really listening skills, because it's I think at its best, because the team makes a show, the crew makes a show. Being able to listen to the crew and being interested in their response to your ideas and their own ideas and how those could be incorporated. Being a great listener, being a great collaborator, being able to think quickly on your feet when you hit, in a day show running, you have to put out so many fires. I mean, there's so much going on, so you really have to be fast on your feet. If there's a problem, you need a solution. Right that second, so that you can move on and solve the next 5 problems. So that's just a list of a couple things, but really above all, all about communicating, being able to tell everyone what it is you're looking for as clearly as possible, so they don't feel like they have to guess. There's really, and I think also if you've had the experience of working on a team, then you'll definitely know that feeling when, somebody asks you to do something and then you do it and then they see it and they go, well, now that I see this, that's not actually what I wanted. I mean, that's the worst, and so when you're in that management position, you don't want to be that person that gives unclear direction. And then when you see it, you're like, well, now that I see it, I actually want something completely different. That really, you don't have the time on an animated television show to change your mind like that. And it's also, it's rough on the team. Yeah. So I guess that's actually another part, in addition to communication, is really being in touch with what you want, so that when you're describing it, and in touch with what you want, and also really aware of where you're flexible. So that you can say, well, this part really has to be a certain way, but then this other part, you can do whatever you want with it. Being able to create those boundaries and be very specific about that is key. Otherwise, people will feel like they're guessing, and it'll just be it'll be hard on everyone, and it will be hard on you too, because you're going to ultimately see something that maybe isn't what you want it to be, or maybe the part that you really cared about isn't there, and then the part you were flexible about is exactly what you said, but that wasn't the part that you really cared about. It was this other thing. Everyone just needs to know. They need to be inside your mind with this, and they can't get there unless you tell them. So
great. And okay, so let's finish off with a fun one. I'm gonna combine two. So what do you think? This one was by Daniel Estefania Moran. What do you think Steven and the Jams would be during the pandemic lockdown in Beach City?
Oh, if they were locked down? Well, I mean, if that were happening in the show, then Steven would have never been able to take his trip, which he really, really needed to be able to do. So I think that would be very hard on him. I think that having a chance to get out and explore the human world is so important to him. But I think at the same time, I think that they would all be worried about Greg more than anything, trying to make sure that he's safe, and taking care of each other. I mean, they always do. They always try to. So I think, regardless of what's happening in that world, they were always going to keep taking care of each other. Steven was always going to come back to see them, and they were always going to be in touch with him. So I think, I don't know, I've been thinking a lot as I've been here, doing video chats with my family and feeling so far apart from them. I really wish we could all be together right now. So the thought of that, having that for the characters in the show, is actually a lovely thought.
Yeah, it definitely is. So everyone out there, take care, please. Reach out. And well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for being part of this. We hope that we can do this in the near future in person, that we can get back together with everybody. And thank you everyone that was here. Thank you all for your questions, and I hope everyone has a great night.
Thank you so much. These were such amazing questions. I'm so honored to be here. I'd love to do this in person someday. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, Rebecca. Thank you, everyone. And good night.